we'll start, if that suits you. So welcome everybody. Just looking at the names on the list, I think I recognize some of you, so welcome back. To those I don't recognize, my name's Ariana Rabin. I am running the events for the Startup Resilience Programme that Capital Enterprise have been running during lockdown. And we organised this event today with Roshni because she is the latest expert that we've got on our Startup Resilience community. She'll be running a accountability group starting, actually I'm not too sure when it starts, but I'll let her next week. I'll let her give you a few more details on it in just a sec, but I did want to point you guys in the direction of our next weekly panel, which is on Tuesday, and it's on the changing way we work. Might be quite interesting. I think it will be interesting, so I'm just going to pop it here. Always mention it in our events the previous week, so I do hope you join us for that. And otherwise, I hope you do join us for Roshni's group after this event. So you've seen what she's about. But I will hand over to her to introduce herself, since she'll probably do a better job than I will, as well as the group. And while Roshni's doing that, those of you who've joined us for previous events know I like to do this. I like to get everybody who's online to just put their name and their company in the chat, which some people have already found. Just so that we know who's watching, who's online, and basically make it seem a bit more human rather than just some talking heads on a screen. So do feel free to put your name and company in the chat while Roshni's introducing herself. So I'll hand over to Roshni now.
Thank you so much, Ariana. Thanks for having me here today. Hey guys, looking forward to the next hour. I'm just gonna share my screen. Can everybody see that?
I can see that.
Good. All right. So let's start about me. Roshni Patel, as Ariana mentioned. I have had over 15-year career in consulting, and that was mostly with a large global consulting company called Accenture. My focus over the most recent years was all things digital innovation and design, and I would work with my clients who are predominantly banks across the world in solving their big chunky strategic problems, generally using new technology and innovation. Earlier in my career, I had a few projects that I worked with the NGO sector, both in the UK and in Asia, and that kind of gave me a little bit of a taste around there's more to corporate world. I have most recently started working with and advising smaller businesses, and mostly actually startups focused on topics such as sustainability and social impact, and focusing on things like Gen Z wealth distribution, social mobility, financial inclusion, how to solve some of the big changes coming through from the COVID pandemic, and a bunch of other really super interesting stuff. So today is all around the topic of purpose-led innovation and how businesses, and specifically startups focused in the tech world, can define a core purpose in everything that they do and are and be in helping their customers and solving some kind of social, environmental, or reaching need, and in doing that, trying to balance how to also make money and adhere to the commercial measures and success that we typically see in the business world. So I've got some content to go with you. I've got some a little video which I'll start with, and then I've got a little bit of a short exercise which hopefully we'll get some time to do. So I hope that sounds good. I hope you're looking forward to this. Thanks. Let's go.
Sounds great. We've had some responses in the chat as well, if you want to know who's watching.
Yes, please.
Who have we got? We've got Carl, who's come to many of our events. Welcome back, Carl. We've got a youth charity member, somebody from a plant-based skincare company, and a student who's joining, and Elle from Bridge that helps people from a wider social understanding. develop a wider social understanding of their global community, which sounds great. We've got lots of kind of social responsibility companies in here today, I think.
Cool, wonderful. So let's start with a little video.
There is a quiet revolution afoot. It may not be as loud as the technology revolution, but some experts predict it will be just as transformative. Its reverberations are being felt across executive boardrooms, foundation offices, state houses, and startups. And it's fundamentally shifting the way investments are made, policies are penned, funds are endowed, and careers are chosen. This movement, which has been dubbed the Impact Revolution, advances a vision of doing well while doing measurable good.
Cool. So that was a video, guys, by Forbes, and there's a much longer version. I'm happy to send around the link later. But it sets out kind of why there really is a moment right now to focus on social impact and doing good in the business world. So to start with some definitions then, I had a question for you guys. What does sustainability or social impact or doing good mean to you before I go into some kind of industry definitions? Feel free to shout out or jot down in the chat box. Ariana, you and I sort of, when we were briefing about this, had some discussion kind of from your perspective. What does sustainability or social impact mean?
Well, obviously there's the kind of cynical take on it, which is that it's how big companies do good PR.
I'm so glad you said that.
But for me personally, I think that it should go further than that. I think that companies are made of people. People generally want to do good. And therefore, you know, your company should not be there solely for the purpose of making money, although that is the technical definition of what a company is in many cases. I think it should do more than that. I think you should have an impact on your wider society. And we're getting a few answers in the chat as well, which I'll read out if you like.
Yes, please.
So solving problems such as poverty, access to education, gender equality, etc. But there are loads of different areas. Someone else says creating a long-term strategy that is making the world a better place. Considering the wider aspects of what you do. Somebody just says social impact. Does anyone else want to add anything? Go ahead and send it to the chat.
Cool. Well, while we do that, I think you guys have all covered it. Probably I'm already talking to a group of experts, but I've taken some industry definitions here. So sustainability is predominantly focused on 3 pillars. So economic, environmental, and social, and kind of informally that's known as profits, planet, and people. Social impact then specifically is the effect on people, communities, and societies of something that has or hasn't happened, an activity, a program, a policy, and the important thing is it can be positive or negative. And then I wanted to share a little bit around the Sustainable Development Goals. Hopefully everybody has come across these, but effectively the United Nations in 2017 defined the 17 goals with the purpose of creating a better and more sustainable future for everyone on the planet. There are 17 different goals covering things like environmental impact, social injustice, poverty, and a whole bunch of really interconnected themes, which countries are aiming to have some kind of a resolution towards by 2013. And what's interesting is we're seeing a number of businesses now start to align what they're doing behind achieving some of these sustainable development goals. And I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. So why is it important now? I mean, the third sector, charities, NGOs have been around for ages, but I don't know if you've sensed it, there is definitely a wave of change that's happening now. And particularly commercial businesses, whether they're large corporates or startups, whilst traditionally they've had a kind of CSR function, are now really considering how they can be purpose-led. And I wanted to share some context around why I think that's happening now. So first of all, the World Economic Forum at Davos in January. World Economic Forum holds an annual gathering of global leaders, governments, kind of 3,000 odd large global players. And this January, it was their 50th anniversary, and they were focused on the topic of sustainability. And it's the first time on that global kind of platform the topic was talked about, and specifically topics like what does broader stakeholder commercialism and capitalism mean, and how can governments and institutions work better to solve for the SDG and Paris climate related challenges. So that's never been talked about on that kind of platform, and the wave of changes and media coverage off the back of that was immense. Secondly, a little bit more recent and very close to us all has been the COVID virus and the pandemic that has spread across the whole world. The negative side of this pandemic has been that every person in society, in all societies, in all countries, will be impacted in some way. And in the UK, The Economist has done some work around the fact that we're going to see a wealth gap, we're going to see a jobs gap, we're going to see an education gap, and of course a health gap as a result of this happening. But that's driven us as society to act in a different way. So we're seeing much more community spirit, probably because we're all in it together, and we want to help each other. So we've had the things like the NHS Clap for Carers and a whole bunch of volunteering, which has, I guess, changed a mindset in terms of how we're living our life and thinking about others. But at the same time, I think as consumers, we've put a different expectation on businesses. So we no longer want to be sold stuff. We want to be buying things and businesses providing things to us that will make a difference to our life in some way, which means businesses are going to have to and have started to address that. And innovation is one way to do it, given they need to do it quickly and often online because physical interaction is so limited at the moment. And then the government has had to respond as well. And I always talk about the contact tracing app as an example of innovation to solve some kind of problem, but it's a bit of a mess right now given what we've heard in the media. So probably not worth reflecting on that one so much. Thirdly, so over the last month or so, we've seen the protests going on a global level around Black Lives Matter and the challenges that happened with police in America. What's super interesting is there's never before on such a global level been this level of discussion and outcry around racism and social injustice. And again, this feels like a real time for change. Businesses have started to address, I mean, all businesses with some kind of media presence have made commentary, but a lot have started to go further than that. So Google announced a whole bunch of diversity and inclusion measures specifically around that community that they've looked to address. So widespread change potentially going to happen in terms of social injustice, born out of something that was really quite terrible. But then finally, the investment market has been super interesting in the whole ESG, which is environmental, sustainable, and governance space. Despite all of the turbulence that we've seen over the short term, the impact investment market has seen phenomenal growth. It was valued at something like $500 billion in 2018, and we're seeing a doubling of growth year on year since 2015, which is in some cases outperforming traditional funds, and so it gives impetus for businesses purely from a economical perspective once they've agreed what their social focus is, to see that this is going to be a growing space. And Social Enterprise UK specifically had a report out which showed that the value of the social enterprise industry is worth 60 billion. I think that was a couple of years ago, but that was at the time 3% of GDP. So this is definitely going to get bigger. And so it feels like timing is really important right now, where you're considering how to make impact as a business. So I wanted to then focus a little bit on the tech world, and I'm going to start off with Salesforce. So Mark Benioff, who is the CEO of Salesforce, he actually wrote a book in 2004 called Compassionate Capitalism. And it was all around how businesses and large companies should have at their core doing good, as well as focusing on how to make money. And their journey, Salesforce's journey, has been interesting. They recently announced, I think at their last year's Dreamforce annual summit, that they're going to have an outward-facing commitment to 6 of the SDGs, which I've highlighted here, and they're going to be spending 17 million of investment helping support the overall impact agenda, which is a big commitment and statement out to the market. They were in trouble sometime for not paying their taxes, but on the other hand, Mark Benioff specifically has been in some conversations around a higher corporation tax for big tech, which will then be used to help the homeless in San Francisco. So it's interesting how the position for Salesforce is evolving and getting stronger in terms of its impact. The other thing I wanted to highlight to you guys is that there is a new player in town. So in the startup world, we all know what the unicorn is and how some of them have grown. But there's a new movement and a new entity that's been introduced into the mix called the Zebra movement, or Zebra Unites. And these are businesses which focus on both profitability and doing good, so impact, hence the black and white, 2 colors representing both sides of the coin. And specifically, the Unite movement helps with startups who are focusing on impact. So I think we'll hear more and more about Zebras coming up. So next up, I've got some examples that I wanted to share with you. How are we doing on time? So first one is Supply Change. Supply Change is a UK-based business startup. It's been running for 2 years, all female founder, and it effectively enables social businesses to be part of the public sector procurement process in getting hold of the things that they need. And what's cool about this business is they're actually looking to design from an overall systems perspective and trying to affect broader scale change. A friend of mine sits on their board and made me aware of them. Quite cool. Next up is an entity called Homeboy Industries. Homeboy is based in LA. They are the world's biggest organization helping with the rehabilitation and reintegration of people that have been incarcerated in jails back into society. And they started off by providing a whole bunch of support services, mental health, and so on. But they've moved in a number of different directions in setting up things like cafes and bakeries. They've famously got a tattoo service. And they've helped thousands of people kind of get back into life, but also then develop some kind of way of living and earning, which is very cool. They've been around, I think, 30 years. Next up, Echo. So Echo is a London-based business. Their vision is to set up an economy where everyone's time and skills are valued, and their premise is a platform which connects kind of all different types of people and their skills, so writers, teachers, artists, and the idea is you swap an hour of your time with someone else. They've got, I think, over 5,000 people on their platform operating from East London, but they're going to increase up to a few more UK-based hubs, which is very cool. Next up, Winnow. So Winnow is very interesting. They are an AI-based tech company, which is all around reducing food waste, especially in kitchens. So their technology helps chefs better prepare and measure food. And so effectively, the overall food waste system is helped through what they do. And chefs and people working in kitchens, their kind of job and lives made easier as well. And then finally, benevolent AI. So Benevolent is, again, a tech-based company. They use both human intelligence and AI technology to effectively re-engineer or reimagine drug discovery and come up with new kind of medicines and things to help hospitals and broader society. They started in 2013. They're in 3 different locations and currently in their 3rd funding round. So a kind of range of different organizations there, tackling different things, different issues, social issues, broader environmental issues, different use groups, and in different ways. If anyone's got any questions, of course, please shout out.
We did have one small comment, which is a slightly cynical one, about Salesforce's 17 million not being a very significant proportion of their 17 billion revenue.
Yep, totally agree. Totally agree. And it's so interesting how the power of the marketing function has come into play in this whole agenda. And it goes back to Arian, what you said at the beginning of the conversation. 17 is a nice number because it aligns to the number of goals, but of course they can be doing much, much, much more. Okay, so next up, I had a bit of an exercise for us to do. So I wanted to focus on Triodos Bank. I don't know how many people have come across Triodos Bank, but it's effectively an ethical bank that is committed to people's future. They want to have quality of life for the people who use their services. They talk about human dignity for all and money that has values. And they're really interesting. They have a number of different products and propositions that you can see here. Basic kind of banking services, but then they branch out into ethical investments and a number of different savings products, really tailored to different types of organizations, such as the charity sector. They're also the UK's first crowd funding bank, which is quite cool. And they've been going on with providing 30 years of sustainable products. So they've been kicking around for quite some time. And the level of their impact in terms of community individuals has been pretty broad. So I thought it would be interesting for us to spend a few minutes on answering a couple of questions about them based on what I've shared. So the first question is, which are the users, end users, that you think are impacted by the bank? And ideally, we would be thinking broader than customers and shareholders. So what do you guys think? Shout out or put it in the chat box.
So could you just repeat the question, Roshni? So
yeah, sure.
The answers you're looking for? What kind of answer?
Which are the users that are impacted by the services that this bank provides and what it stands for and how it helps people?
First reply is people in countries where economies are being diversified in a positive way through impact investments.
Yep, for sure.
Someone else says investees. Anyone else have any thoughts? The community projects they support.
Yep, 100%. And that has 2 angles. It's the community projects that Triodos itself supports, but it's also the community projects which some of their customers, who could be social enterprises or charities or small businesses, also support.
Mm-hmm. Do you agree with the previous 2 responses as well?
Yeah, definitely. The kind of the bank's customers and investees is a given. I guess what I'm trying to draw out is when we're talking about impact, there's a much broader ecosystem of users that we need to think about.
Mm-hmm. Companies seeking investment start to understand that it doesn't all need to be about selfish pursuit of profit at all costs.
And that understanding could even lead them to make Triodos their main banker, which is quite cool, I think.
Yeah.
Or it could be the other way around. In what Triodos have done and how they've set up could drive that kind of thinking for new businesses.
Someone else has finally said individuals, which I think that was the first one that sprung to my mind.
Yeah, yeah. The other one I like is the fact that they're the UK's first crowdfunding bank, which means they're setting up a system where their own customers can help start new businesses by contributing whatever level of funding. No other bank is enabling that right now in the UK, so I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so the second question is, what is the value and impact that the bank creates? So value for itself and impact for others.
Somebody just asked you to repeat that.
Sure. So what is the value that the bank creates for itself, and what is the impact that it creates for others, particularly social impact?
Perhaps we could break that into two, so starting with value for themselves.
Yeah.
Peace of mind that they're doing better than alternatives.
And I guess that's around definition of better.
Oh yeah, interesting point.
Yeah.
Value for themselves is clear differentiation with a very positive emotional undertone.
100%.
It ties money, bank, and capitalism with doing good.
Yep.
Which will have a massive knock-on effect.
Definitely.
Transparency.
Yes, and that is a brilliant one, because one of the things most organizations, let alone banks, do really badly right now is be transparent with their customers. There was a recent Futera report which said millennials, 70% of, it wasn't even millennials actually, it was Gen Z, 70% of Gen Z no longer think honesty is enough, they want transparency. And so I think that's something that this bank does very well, because it reports on its impact.
How would you define the specific distinctions between those two in this particular case?
A lot of it is around the communication of the impact that they've made.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Shall we separately talk about the impact that Triodos creates for itself and others, or shall we?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the more pertinent one here. Does anyone have any views? I think we covered it a lot in identifying the users.
Isn't there a potential problem that this is just window dressing if it's about communication?
From what perspective?
I don't know if the person
who asked the question.
So if transparency is communication, then it could risk just being like all for show, I suppose, is the meaning here.
I understand. Yeah. And I think for a lot of organizations, that is what we're seeing right now. I mean, there's a term that goes around purpose washing. So organizations talk a lot about their purpose, but they don't really, everything they do, how they treat their customers, how they bring in the things that they need through their supply chains, kind of everything that they stand for and they do is not necessarily reflected in that purpose. So you're right, there is a kind of a lipstick service when it is just about communications. But kind of later on, I'll talk about measurement and impact businesses. By their nature, one of the things they need to focus on is how to actually track and measure and then report on impact, and there's different ways of doing that depending on the type of organization you are.
Before we move on to that, we've had 2 comments in which I think are a bit taking the cynic stance, or perhaps taking the realist stance, depending on how you look at it. It is difficult to comprehend that a profit-led company will be offering this kind of service without a latent agenda. How long will this last? And then someone else says, when you stand in front of a VC and pitch an impact reusers, the third question is always traction and profit. So I think kind of getting at the fact that like there's a perception that these can't be sustainable businesses in the sense of like actually lasting as businesses. What are your thoughts on that, Roshni?
I think that is a common perception, and actually it will go back to some of the measurement stuff I talk about. So businesses, whether they're startups, early stage, whether they're in post-C funding, whether they're established SMEs, a business plan and how they're going to execute on that business plan, and particularly financial measurement, is something that typically is always done, sometimes well, sometimes not. And particularly when you're in a funding scenario, you need to report back through governance mechanisms to your investment board on that stuff. In the social enterprise and the impact world, there is another vein of reporting, which is actually around impact reporting. So what is the impact that you're making, to who, by what scale? And I think if purpose-led businesses focus on both of those from the offset, so they're very clear on how they're going to make money, but they're very clear on what their purpose is and the impact they're going to achieve. And then they put the mechanisms in to, first of all, understand the impact and then measure it. With a focus on managing across both, I think it is possible to be successful, and successful on a longer term basis. And then some of the kind of contextual things I talked about, for me personally, I feel like there is a wave of change to be ridden right now, given so many changing expectations. But I would love to hear other people's views.
We've got a couple more follow-ups from same people, kind of following, I'm going to call it the cynical line here.
Sure.
That might not be the accurate take, depending on your opinion. So the same applies to charities. The same issue of how long it will last applies to charities like Oxfam, where the actual beneficiaries of the charity only receive about 2% of the funds the charity raises. And this guy says that you can dress these things up nicely and not really show your underhand intention, which I think is indeed a cynical take, because you know, I guess why should we believe these companies is the kind of underlying question here. Problematic.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's totally fair. I mean, one of the things for me to focus on is, once an individual founder or a leadership team has defined, the purpose and why they are setting up or running a particular business and the impact they want to deliver, that has to be in some ways aligned to a set of personal values. And one of the things I would always recommend then is having a culture and a set of people, and therefore the processes and structure around that, to pervade that purpose in everything that the business does. But you're right. I think there are many organizations that, for customer acquisition purposes or charity funding purposes, kind of say something, but actually don't live and breathe it. The other context bit I would add is we're in a world now, like I mentioned, that investing into impact-based organizations is significantly growing. So the funding is coming from a different place, and not necessarily third sector or government funding. And also large corporates themselves are thinking about new strategies with sustainability as a key pillar, and they will have the amount of capital behind them to drive that forward. So it's a bit of an evolving picture, I think. But no, I agree with some of the cynicism. It's totally right.
We have more comments on that, but I think we also have a comment saying, shall we move on and come back to this?
Cool. All right, let's do that. So next up, so I wanted to share a few of the things that I think are important when talking about innovation and specifically to define purpose-led businesses. So the first up is, and we've covered some of this already. So first up is looking at the design system. I'm a big proponent of human-centered design. I hope most people have heard about this, design thinking or user experience-led design. Really, this is getting under the covers of what people want and need. And then I would now extend that to say what their motivations and behaviors are around that, what therefore can be done to address those, and how realistic and financially viable is it to do that. And this is all to come up with the service, the product, the proposition to solve that specific need for what a business stands for. Second up, as part of that design process, it's really important to have a diverse set of people involved. So that extends from the team running the work to come up with the proposition and the service, through to the users that you would bring in to do your testing. So they could be from schools, they could be from community, depending on what the business's purpose is and the service or proposition it's trying to deliver. But also then not just getting their needs and behaviors and motivations, but testing the product on a continuous basis with them through the life cycle of development of the product or service. Super important. And then actually, when we think about social impact, we need to think much broader than the hat of the customer or the end user. This is probably a bit difficult to see, but there are so many different players involved in a social impact design ecosystem. You can think about government, you can think about communities, you can think about schools, you can think about individuals, you can think about families. There's many different constructs to consider more than just a customer, which we would typically look at in a human-centered design process. Did I see a question or a comment floating up?
We've had a couple more in, yeah. I don't know if we want to keep going and get through the presentation and then kind of end in a longer discussion though.
Okay, let's do that. Next up, so this is what I started to talk about, business value and social impact. So in running a startup, in running any kind of size of organization, there are typical KPIs that we would look at. So things like number of customers signed up to an app, number of transactions online, number of products purchased in any given go, number of signups, and all of these ultimately translate into the cost of running the business, how much money is being made and how much revenue is coming through and how much money is being made. That stuff generally is well known and well accepted, but it's the other side of the coin which purpose-led businesses must also think about. So there are a number of different industry standards for measuring impact, but there is no consistently held view right now of how to do it, and I think that's because it's such a forming industry still. But generally, if you can think about 3 layers in terms of outputs of a product or a service, the outcomes that it achieves, and then tangibly the impacts that it makes on a person or a set of people or a community or a society. This is both sides of the coin that need to be considered when thinking about purpose-led business, and most importantly, how to do that. So upfront in the business plan, in the visioning, through to definition of the specific products and services, these need to be defined. What are the exact KPIs to look at? How do they get measured on an ongoing basis through both the life cycle of delivery and the setup of the business, but also ongoing business as it grows, iterates, pivots, how those measures tracked. So what kind of mechanisms are used? Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? And probably most importantly, how is the impact reported back? Back to industry, back to other businesses, because it's great for a business to say they're purpose-led and they want to make an impact, but the most powerful message is when they can say they've done it and this is how they've done it and this is what they've achieved. Okay. And at this point, I wanted to introduce the concept of the B Corps, which I wonder if many of you have heard about. So certified B corporations, they're effectively businesses which have been set up with a contract that they will be delivering some kind of social or environmental impact, but every part of their business is validated, that their setup of their business is validated, that they will do that. They are measured and tracked, and actually they have legal accountability to deliver on those promises, both from a profit and purpose perspective. And the idea is these businesses deliver social impact or environmental impact across employees internally, communities, and society and environment more broadly. I love the B Corp movement. I think it's really cool. They've got, I think, 3,000, maybe slightly more than 3,000 companies signed up right now. A couple of examples I pulled out. So the big issue here, I think most people know the big issue is around people, providing people who are living on the streets with the ability to sell the content. But I think it's less known that they've also introduced a kind of an online trade element where those homeless can also sell some specific services, which I think is pretty cool. They are certified as a B Corp. And then Kickstarter also is now certified as a B Corp. So Kickstarter being the platform where people can contribute to really early stage business ideas in terms of funding. A couple of other, I guess, more famous and global examples would be Tom's, so the company that provides the shoes and provides investment back into communities. And also Ben & Jerry's is now a B Corp, which is quite cool.
Someone else has mentioned change.org.
Yes, change.org also has got certification. And what I thought was quite interesting when I was looking into them a little bit more for one of my other projects is they have a pending B Corp status too, which can apply to early stage startups. And so as a startup becomes more and more established, they're already recognized through the community and need to go through slightly less work to get fully fledged certification once they're slightly more established and bigger, which is good. Finally, the thing I wanted to raise again, which some of which you've dived into earlier, is having the right people as part of the organization, starting with yourself, having the vision that yours will be a purpose-led business. What is the impact it's trying to deliver? Having your own kind of values around that, quite fixed and straight, but then building out a team with a set of principles and culture which embody effectively doing good. So being really human, being kind, showing empathy, all these kinds of good traits that we would expect to see in the culture of running a business, which ultimately delivers a social impact and good. And that also extends to boards and C-suite leadership teams. So finding that alignment with the right people and ethos to drive forward your business. And then working with the social enterprise ecosystem, because there's so many different organizations out there who are not sort of providing services in their own right that are very happy to partner. There's a business called Regenerate that recently published a social enterprise ecosystem diagram, which has a forming number of players that can help in a number of different ways. So for me, this is probably the most important one when it comes to thinking about launching and developing a purpose-led innovation business. And I guess that's all really I wanted to cover. So leaving you with the question, having heard all of that, what's the aspiration? And I hope it is to do good and make money. And I think purpose-led innovation can help you to do that. Thanks. We go to some of the questions.
Not so much questions as further comments. One person actually said, like 5 minutes before you yourself ended on it, that he thinks companies should start with treating their staff and their families in a humane manner, and that will filter through all of your operations if you do so, which I think is
100%. I couldn't agree with that more. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard this this term, intrapreneurs. So these are people within an organization, often a corporate organization that doesn't necessarily have purpose behind its strategy, but coming up with ideas to affect social impact and change. If as part of a culture where people are trusted and respected for their opinions, those kinds of ideas should come from all levels of the organization and go up to the top to be executed as part of the strategy. And a key part of treating people right is listening to their views.
I think it can be very difficult, though, especially the bigger the corporation gets, right? And perhaps for some of our viewers today, being startup founders, as you grow and grow and grow, I think I personally would be interested to hear your advice on how they maintain that as their business grows. Like when you're 5 people working around one desk, you know, it's quite easy to be like, we believe in equality. But when you're 30 people and suddenly you don't know all of your team members as well as you once did, how do you maintain that?
It's really interesting. I'm working with a talent-based organization right now, and one of the things they do is improve hiring processes for organizations. And a key part of their selection criteria is understanding not just what someone's done, but also the motivations behind why they've done something, and also why they want to join the organization. So even if you set up a kind of company vision, mission, culture, and it's defined by 5 things, equality could be one of those. No matter how progressed you are in the development of the organization, you can always still refer back to those and test them in different ways through the people that you bring in, through the way in which you manage performance. But it may be that some of that needs to change as you do grow out. But being, I guess, intentional behind cultivating that is super important, and recognizing when it changes to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so getting everything written down, I guess, as a form of accountability is important.
Yeah, and you know, some organizations have included in performance management scorecards which are focused not just on financial profit, but also true people and culture development. And social enterprises, as part of business leader performance in business, will have social impact measurement in there tied to people's comp.
Someone has sent in a question saying, do you know if there are any UK venture builder and consultancy firms purely focused on helping build social impact ventures and helping corporates ideate and implement impact elements in their businesses?
Yeah, actually, there are quite a few. So I work with one, I'm a mentor at one called Year Here. So they run a number of cohorts throughout the year. Their purpose is effectively using innovation to spin up social impact ventures. On Purpose is another one. I think IDEO has a number of groups focused on different topics within the sustainability and impact space. Very interesting webinar I attended yesterday with an organization called Rainmaker, which has kind of been around for some time in the innovation space. And their webinar was all around mapping the startup environment and ecosystem to actual SDGs, which was really interesting. And quite a few others that I'm seeing pop up almost on a weekly basis. A lot of brand creative agencies focused on impact, a lot of pure innovation consultancies, and then there are some bigger strategic consultancies as well focused on social impact. Dalberg is an example.
What was the first one you mentioned? I didn't quite catch it. Apologies.
Year Here.
Sorry?
Year here. Shall I type it?
Yeah.
Year here.
Completely misheard that. Thank you. Someone says, in terms of pitching, I'm sure I'm going to come up against a lot of skeptics in social impact profit, as has already been discussed on this call. Can you recommend sources for positive statistics of this, of the importance of having social impact in your business plan, I suppose?
I guess the first question would be, are you pitching to a social impact focused fund? Because there are some. And for me, that would be a really good starting point. In terms of sources, and not off the top of my head, but I have read something recently. So Irene, I think maybe we can send something out afterwards. Yeah.
What were some of those funds then? Perhaps that's a useful thing to start from.
Yeah, now you're going to test me. Their names again. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I've read about them.
Okay.
Europe and UK are leading the way, and I feel like America's now starting to catch up in this space. Interestingly, someone I know has set up a pledge called Reset, which is all around the government trying to come up with a fund similar to the Future Fund, where they will support funding for innovation-based ventures focus on social impact. That was going up to Treasury for conversation, so hopefully that gets passed, which would be brilliant.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I'm just scrolling through the chat to see any comments we missed, so please do send a few more in, guys. If you have any thoughts, or perhaps any comments on what you're trying to do with your business personally, if you're running one, and how you'd like to implement some of the things we talked about here. Okay, here's one that came in while you were talking about design thinking. I wonder if you could sort of explain that a little bit more, because I think they've taken it as like design should always be centered around humans. You know, that's not a specific concept, but as far as I've understood it previously, design thinking is a bit more than that. It's more than just saying we should design things for humans, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
The basis of a design process using human-centered design is to put the person that you're trying to solve something for, whatever your proposition idea is, at the center, and understanding everything around them, their context, their behaviors, their needs, the market, then the competitors, the space, to come up jointly with a proposition that's going to work. And design thinking uses a number of different techniques to do the research for the market and the users, to test some hypotheses, to co-create and develop the product or the proposition or the service together with users by bringing them into the process, asking them a bunch of questions, showing them prototypes, hi-fi, lo-fi, building it, and then taking that MVP or early stage product, whatever it is, back to the customer to get them to use it, see how it looks, how it feels, taking their feedback, building it back into the development process. And by working with them throughout, you're ideally coming up with something that's actually going to work for them, rather than from the outset thinking that you have an idea of something that people need, but actually won't necessarily be taken up or bought or used.
Okay.
Because it's a hypothesis, it's an internal hypothesis.
Kind of reversing the process then, basically.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I think we'll do one final comment before wrapping up. And this is around what you were saying about how Gen Z and kind of the young of today are more interested in holding companies accountable, and that the problem is that decision makers are still people from a different generation with different value sets, who maybe won't implement those things. And I guess the question would be, how do we get around that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess there are a few different dynamics. So you've got, I call them dinosaurs in big businesses that are not going to change anytime soon, but you've already got big businesses that are changing. So I really like the example of NatWest, which is the former RBS Group. Their not so new CEO, Alison Rose, she defined a new strategy not so long ago where sustainability was the core of their strategy, and everything they do is going to be helping the environment, communities, their customers. So this is an example of a big business that's had a torrid past, but is already focused on how they're going to change with this at the heart of what they're doing going forward. The other angle, though, is consumers. So I think consumers' expectations and behaviors are also changing. So they will demand on small businesses, large businesses to change. And I think we're already starting to see that. So boycotting of certain products, reduction in take-up rates on kind of not addressing BLM, for example. We've seen some examples of that. And then you've got the actual social entrepreneur and social enterprise ecosystem of people who are doing great things, who will start to change the dial as well, and will potentially become acquired by large corporates and therefore be able to, from the inside, instill change, or become big enough in their own right to become those large businesses that drive the agenda going forward. So it's a kind of interesting dynamic of lots of different players, but I think customer expectations driving spending and buying behavior is already changing massively.
I think the Black Lives Matter movement is quite a good example of how there can be change coming from many different angles, and then just one catalyst that makes it bubble up into the mainstream, right? I think it comes from everyone. Would you agree?
Yep. There was this example I read about yesterday. A CEO stood down because he refused to think about what George Floyd had been through. It's really going to bug me now because I can't remember which organization it was, but there was so much backlash against him publicly saying that he was forced to resign, and the company had to rethink a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, accountability is the new normal. Thank you so much for leading this discussion, Roshni. I think this has been a really interesting session, and I've certainly learned a lot about what's happening at different tiers of different organizations, which I never knew before. And I've written down a lot of notes, which I'm going to go and Google this weekend. So really appreciate you joining us, and thank you to everyone in the audience for coming on such a hot and sunny afternoon to watch a session on how we can all kind of do better in our business. So hope to see you all online again very soon, and I hope you also all go and check out Roshni's group on the Startup Resilience community too.
Thanks, Ariana. Thanks, guys. Great session. Cheers.
Bye, everybody.